Okay, so we're going to start off through this class with a couple of the better known Christian cults. And if you remember from last week, we call them Christian cults, not because they're actually Christian, but because they claim to be Christian, but they're actually not. So we call them Christian cults. Because it's like they're Christian, but they're actually a cult, so it's deceptive. And one of the most important ones to talk about is Jehovah's Witnesses. Why do you think that's so important? I'll ask you something. How many of you have ever had an encounter, a conversation, anything like that, with a Mormon? Anybody? Few of you? Maybe like half, something like that. What about a Muslim? Yeah, like 1, 2 maybe. What about a Buddhist? Yeah? Okay. What about a Christian Scientist? The cult Christian Scientist? You encountered them in college? Okay. Now, how many have had some sort of a conversation, encounter, met with a Jehovah's Witness? Just about everybody. That's why it is so important to talk about Jehovah's Witnesses. So, numerically, they're not the largest. They're pretty large. There's several million. I don't remember the exact number. There's several million around the world. But they are ones that you encounter a lot because of their idea of, their service. So before we jump into it, let's talk about some famous Jehovah's Witnesses here. I don't know if you guys knew this. Who knew that Michael Jackson was a Jehovah's Witness? A lot of those people out in California are Scientologists, but he's raised Jehovah's Witness. All right, Serena Williams, the tennis player. I think she actually had a big upset or something here recently, didn't she? Yeah, that was rough for her. Prince, or the artist formerly known as Prince, or Prince, who was the artist formerly known as Prince and was Prince before that, whatever you want to call it. Do you know him? Everybody know him? Here's one I didn't know. Dwight D. Eisenhower was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. Didn't know that. And Lou Whitaker, anybody know him? Heard of him before? Baseball player, Lou Whitaker. Okay. Yeah. Now, there is one thing you can notice. There is a particular, now I'm not saying all these are really devout, practicing Jehovah's Witnesses, but they were at the very least raised in it. There is a particular career that you will never see represented among the Jehovah's Witnesses. Actually, a couple of careers. Can you guess on what that career is? And let me give you a hint. Keep in mind that you need to know this for Dwight D. Eisenhower was only raised Jehovah's Witness. He left once he was older. What kind of careers do you think Jehovah's Witness you'll never see them in? They're not in the military. That's one of them. Do it? Nope. They will not hold a political office. Those are the two things you will never, ever, ever see a practicing Jehovah's Witness do, is be in the military or run for any kind of office. And we'll talk a little bit about that here eventually. Okay, let's talk about the history of Jehovah's Witnesses, get an idea of where they come from. It all started with this guy there. His name is Charles Taze Russell. And when he was 20, in the year 1872, he decided that he wanted to start a Bible study. And really this whole movement began as sort of a home Bible study that reached new people and grew, and they began to really elevate him as this really well-known preacher and teacher. But the problem with Russell was that he really struggled with some Christian, traditional, solid, good, important Christian doctrine. Particularly, he really struggled with eternal hell, the idea that you could go someplace where you could be in torment for the rest of forever. And he also came to reject the Trinity, reject the deity of Christ. So he started off pretty young age, actually going down the wrong path. But he still managed to get a lot of people interested and a lot of people following him. Finally, 1879 was a big year because that's when he started co-publishing the Herald of the Morning. And later on, he changed the name to the Watchtower. Now, if you know anything about the Jehovah's Witnesses, you know their governing society is the Watchtower Society. And they're sort of like this, I don't want to call it like a council, but sort of like this organization of group of men that sit at the head of that. But Watchtower Society originally was a magazine and they started distributing a lot of tracts and pushing their doctrine and pushing their ideas. And do you remember in the first lesson we talked about common cult characteristics? And one of the most common characteristics is they have a extra biblical holy book, something other than the Bible that they treat as inspired. That's very much the Watchtower society, the magazines that they print today. They continue to print even today. And really those are pushed among the Jehovah's Witnesses to read, to study, to understand, more so than even the Bible itself. So that's sort of how they got their roots started. Now we'll talk about, this is kind of the typical standard we'll follow, with some of these cults, especially like the Christian cults. The Watchtower's been host to a number of scandals over the year. Talk about the history. We'll talk about some of the scandals. In the early Watchtower publications, Charles Taze Russell, actually printed advertisements for something he called miracle wheat. It was wheat that would supposedly grow about 5 times as much as any regular wheat. And what you see right here, this piece of paper on the side, that picture, is an announcement that basically this miracle wheat that's supposed to grow 5 times as much doesn't work very well. Basically, this was a money-making scheme that Russell was involved in. Now today, the Jehovah's Witnesses will tell you, well, you know, he didn't really get the money for it. The society got the money. Well, he really got all the money of the society. He was kind of the guy who benefited everything from it. So that's one of the scandals that, if you talk to a Jehovah's Witness today, they're not going to know much about it though. Or they only know how to defend it. They don't know a lot of real solid facts about it. After Russell came a guy named Rutherford. He was his successor. And Rutherford, I believe it was Rutherford who prophesied that Old Testament prophets, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, would return to earth to reign in the return of Christ. And so they were expecting Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to come in the flesh. Well, in the process, he built this really big fancy house called Beth Sarim. And this big fancy house here was meant for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to live in when they finally returned to earth. Except problem is, in case you didn't see the headlines, they never actually came to earth. And so he actually ended up living in this big fancy house that had been built at the expense of the Jehovah's Witnesses, for pretty much the rest of his life. Really common scandal you find in Jehovah's Witnesses is accusations of child abuse. A lot of times just child molestation is a big issue there. And that's, to a large degree, that's the fault of the Watchtower Society. You know the biblical passage that says, you know, any charge has to be established on 1 or 2 witnesses, right? So you have to have at least 2 people present there who are going to testify to it. Basically, if a child tells their parent that they were molested by, say, someone in the Jehovah's Witnesses, someone in their organization, if they take that to the leaders say, well, you have to have at least 2 witnesses. And so the child will say, well, basically, you'd have to have someone there witness to it. And they won't investigate, they won't look into it, they won't press charges unless you actually have 2 people present who said that child is, or a person or 2 present who says that child's telling the truth. So it's hard to, according to their standards, very hard to stick somebody with some sort of crime like that. But also, do you guys remember last week, one of the primary characteristics of a cult is an us versus them mentality? Remember what I mean? What do I mean by that? Us versus them? It's us and our group, and it's everybody else in the whole world against us, and they all hate us. And so a lot of times when there is an issue like child molestation, they won't go to police. Why? Because the police are them. They're not, I mean, we're not, they're the world. We don't go to the world to solve our problems. So you have many, many issues of child molestation in Jehovah's Witnesses.
What happens in today's society when he comes out of school?
Like when he says it at school?
Yeah.
Well,
when our officials get involved.
Yeah, well, the church can, the school will probably press charges in that case. But if it's a child going to a parent or something, they probably wouldn't do it. Or no, they're hesitant to do it. I won't say they never do it. Anyway, last scandal is the NGO and United Nations scandal. Basically, to the Watchtower Society, the United Nations is just the evil of all evils. They are 100% against United Nations. You don't have anything to do with it. Stay away from them. Well, interestingly enough, at one point, the Jehovah's Witness actually registered as an NGO, which is a non-governmental organization, I believe is what it stands for, with the United Nations, which is insane because they think, we're not supposed to have anything to do with the United Nations. They're completely against it. And they registered as this NGO, and they did it kind of secretly. When it came out public that they had done that, they got rid of that status. They broke that contract, or they nullified it. And they claimed that the only reason that they did that was so that they could have access to certain United Nations libraries, which actually they had access to anyway. You don't have to be an NGO to have access to that sort of stuff. So you find a lot of situations where the organization is dishonest and lying to the people that are following them. There's been quite a few scandals associated with them. Any questions or comments so far? Okay. The Bible gives us a rule to tell whether or not a person is a false prophet. When someone claims to speak in the name of God, does anybody know what that rule is according to the Bible? In Deuteronomy 18:21, we read, "If you say in your heart, how may we know the word that the Lord has? How may we know the word that the Lord has not spoken?" I'm sorry, I'm reading this wrong. "And if you say in your heart, how may we know the word that the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him." Now, right there in Scripture, we're told the one way to identify someone who is falsely claiming to speak in the name of God is if they say something and it doesn't come true. And it's simply not true. Well, the fact is, this has actually happened quite a bit with the Jehovah's Witnesses. You could probably classify them as an apocalyptic cult. You know what that means? Yeah, they're obsessed with the end of the world. They're always predicting it, always making predictions about it. And that's actually happened quite a bit with the Jehovah's Witnesses. They have, first off, they predicted the return of Christ several times. Most notable was in 1914. They predicted Armageddon, which we'll get into what Armageddon is later. They predicted Armageddon would occur. When it didn't, they changed it and said that Armageddon didn't mark the very end, it marked the invisible return of Christ. So they said Christ returned in 1914. They still believe this. He returned in 1914. It was just invisible. Nobody saw it. And now we're waiting for the final return, the final end of everything. Then again, they claimed that he was going to come back, or they claimed that many people living in 1914 would not see death. They would not see the end before Christ returned. They said 1914 marks sort of an end period. Many of us are going to live to see when Christ returns. Okay, as of yet, a lot of those people have actually died and haven't seen it yet. Rutherford, who he said is Russell's successor, claimed that in 1925, the resurrection would commence with the return of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's when he built Beth Sarim. He said it was going to happen in 1925. It didn't happen, and they blamed the members. We didn't really say that. You just think we said that. You misunderstood us. It's your fault for not getting what we said. Then there was a big thing in 1975 when they predicted the return of Christ again. It didn't happen. Again, they blamed the members. Well, you didn't understand us right. We didn't say he would return in 1975. You need to stop assuming we say these things. Have you guys ever known a person who is in an abusive relationship? Like, a woman is married to a guy or living with a guy and he comes home and he beats her, and if you try to talk to her and say, why are you with him? You need to get away from him. She takes the blame herself. Well, it's my fault. I should have had the house cleaner. I should have had his supper. If I had done that, then he wouldn't have to do this. So it's really my fault. She's always taking the blame for everything he does wrong. You know that kind of situation? Sad to say, that's very much what a cult and leader relationship is like. Over and over again, the Watchtower Society wrongly predicted the return of Christ. People expected it. People, and especially in the 1975 one, people sold their houses. They were living out of the back of their cars. They were, do some of you remember this from 1975? Some of you people in here? Yeah. People were living out of the back of their cars. People were putting off having families. They waited till they weren't old enough. or they wait till they were too old to have kids anymore. They put off getting married. They never went to college because they were expecting this to come. They put all their lives on hold so they could devote everything to working for the Watchtower Society. And then in 1975, he didn't return. And that was actually a big black eye to them. Even though they blamed the members, a lot of people, a huge number of people left Jehovah's Witnesses when that happened. But a big number stayed, and they just took the blame. Well, it's our fault. We misunderstood. Okay. Any questions so far? By the way, when they claim things like we never said that, we can actually have indication that they said it because all their publications, they write these kind of things in the Watchtower, their magazine and publications, and we still have the publications going back years. They kind of encourage members not to look at the older stuff because they can see how often they're wrong. But you can go back and look at those things, although many of the older members don't. Many members don't look at the older stuff, they just read the newer stuff. Okay. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about essential Christian doctrine versus the Jehovah's Witnesses doctrine. Okay? You guys remember what we said were the four... Okay, yeah, I left off mankind on this one. There were 5 basic, if we had to say these are the essentials to things you have to believe to be a Christian. If you don't believe this, you can't be a Christian. The 5 things were about God, Jesus, death and resurrection of Jesus, salvation, and mankind. I left off mankind just for, they're very similar what Jehovah's Witnesses believe and what Christians believe. But let's talk a little about how we know Jehovah's Witnesses are not Christian. I mean, you can believe some things that are not correct and still be a Christian, but there are some things that if you haven't got it right, there's no way you're a follower of Christ. So, as far as God goes, Christians, we believe that God is a Trinity in nature, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that He is Unitarian, which means they believe that they don't believe in the Trinity. They believe that Jesus is not God, and they believe that the Holy Spirit is just a force of God. They don't believe He's a personal being. He's a intelligent being. They think He's just a force. As far as Jesus goes, we believe that Jesus is God incarnate. We believe that He is eternally existing, that He's been from the very beginning. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus is Michael the Archangel. So again, they don't believe He's God. They actually believe He's a created being. They just think He was the first ever created being, and then He helped out with the rest of creation. And they believe He was created by God. As far as the death and resurrection of Christ go, we believe that He died and that He rose to life bodily, physical body resurrection. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that He did die, but He rose only spiritually. It's like an existential thing. He rose in my heart is really all. He rose to a spiritual body. His physical body didn't rise. And so the question is then, well, what happened to His physical body? They say, well, it dissolved. God supernaturally dissolved it, so there was no evidence of it. Sounds a little contrived to me, but that's what they believe. And as far as salvation, Christians believe that salvation is by grace through faith. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that it's achieved by works. Now, if you go to their website and actually look at what Jehovah's Witnesses say, they'll tell you, we believe salvation is by grace. But when you look at their practice, the constant drive to do more, to earn, to achieve, if I don't do this, there's no way I can get to things like that, you really get the impression that they are a works-driven cult, as pretty much every cult belief is. Okay. And they have some pretty strange beliefs. They believe that Jesus is Michael the Archangel. How do they get these things? How do they believe that, Jesus, died, but He only rose spiritually. His body was dissolved. How do they defend these kinds of things? And there's lots of ways they can defend it. They're really taught to defend these things certain ways. One of the biggest, strongholds for Jehovah's Witness doctrine is the New World Translation. That's a special translation of the Bible that they translate themselves. And we'll talk more about that in a minute, but it is it is a train wreck of a translation. It's terrible. It is bad translation all the way through. But it's specific. Anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. Now, They believe in Jesus and the Holy Spirit. They do not believe that Jesus and the Holy Spirit are God in the same sense that we do. They believe the Holy Spirit is just a force, not a person. He's a force of God. But they believe that Jesus is a created being. Now, you want to go all the way back in church history. There's a term for that. It's called Arianism. It's the belief that Jesus was created, not God. And that was condemned as a heresy, 1700 years ago. And church has been against it ever since. Okay. Any questions so far? All right. Now, next topic I want to talk about is how to reach a Jehovah's Witness. Why do we want to even bother to reach them anyway? They got all these crazy beliefs. Why bother? So they won't go to hell. Because God's called us to care about the lost. So how do we reach Jehovah's Witnesses? Very carefully. That's a joke, and you'll see why I say very carefully here. Seriously, there's some great advice here for reaching Jehovah's Witnesses. And some of these are mistakes that I've made. And I'm kind of teaching you from my mistakes because I didn't know enough about them when I've had a couple encounters with them before. So let's talk about a few things that'll help us reach Jehovah's Witnesses. One of the most important things you can know is do not argue with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Anybody in here ever tried arguing with Jehovah's Witnesses? Okay. I can tell you what they do. Jehovah's Witness group came to my house, and I wasn't even trying to argue. I was just trying to talk about it factually. They interpreted it as an argument, though. And it was an older guy. My guess is he was probably an elder in one of their kingdom halls. They don't call them churches. They call them kingdom halls. And he came up to the house, and I was just getting in for a run, so I was kind of out of breath. And when I talk, I sound like I'm kind of mad anyway, because I'm out of breath. I'm just miserable. I'm not mad. But he came up and was talking a little bit, and Bree was being nice. They hand her the stuff. She says, "Oh, thank you." She's not going to be as abrupt with them as I am. And they tried talking to me a little, and I said, we have some serious theological differences with the Jehovah's Witnesses. He said, like what? And I said, well, we believe that Jesus is God. And he began to go off and say, well, so-and-so, some person I don't even know, has done an interesting word study on John 1:1, where it says Jesus was God. And actually, he thinks that where it says Jesus was God, it should say Jesus was a God, not a God. And I said, yes, I know there's an absence of a definite article there, but I also studied Greek, and I know that the absence of a definite article can imply a definite article. And I started to tell him all this and explain to him, and immediately his reaction was, "Have a nice day." Didn't even end the conversation. I was in mid-sentence, "Have a nice day," and just turned around and walked. They did not come back to our house for a few years. They just recently started visiting our house again. Because they are trained to stay away from anyone who's going to argue with them. Because they might give you ideas that will challenge your worldview. They don't want that. The Watchtower does not want that. So, do not argue. Okay? Do not ask questions on obvious differences like I did. Well, you don't believe that Jesus is God. Well, how can you say that when John 1:1? Don't ask some questions on that, because I guarantee you they have an answer. And we'll talk more about why in a minute, but they have got answers for everything like that. Do not offend them. And this is the absolute hardest to do, because Jehovah's Witnesses are offended by a lot of things. A whole lot of things. Let me see. Okay. Everybody see the cross over there on the top of that Christian flag? Everybody see the Christian flag? You see the American flag over there in the corner? All right. Alan and JC and Justin, is that it? And Mitchell have facial hair. Okay. See the cross back here? Cross on the front of that. Cross on the side of the thing. These are all things that would offend a Jehovah's Witness. Believe it or not. They are very, very easily offended. And we'll talk more about why in a minute, but they're very easily offended. They overlook it because they believe we're all lost pagans anyway. But if you were one of them, they would make you shave. You'll never see a Jehovah's Witness man practicing it with a facial hair. They think it's very unprofessional. Okay. I guess I can't say that would really offend them, but they have a problem with that. Things like the flag, crosses, things like that do offend them very much so. You have to know their culture. All right? You have to know something about them to really be able to talk and converse with them. And that's not easy, because sometimes they're kind of hush-hush about their culture and their beliefs, things you don't understand at first. Try to make friends. Try to get them to like you, to trust you. Anytime you can do that with any cult is going to be good. Because remember, we talked about that persecution complex, us versus them mentality. In their mind, if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, they think that you're just the most evil, wicked, terrible, depraved, rip-roaring pagans ever. And if you get them to like you, if you show them that you're a good person, if you sincerely show them love, you're challenging that belief. They're taught to believe that you are lost and you're just a bad person. You're really challenging that, though, if you can become their friend. All right? Show them sincere love. Listen to them if you are strong in your faith. Okay? If you feel very strong in the Christian faith, you can sit down, you can listen to their beliefs, talk with them, question them in a very humble type of way. And that may open them up a little bit to you. And one of the biggest things is try to get them to think. Okay? Jehovah's Witnesses, like I said, like with the guy who just turned around and walked away from me, they are trained not to think. They are told to stay away from anything that could be anti-Jehovah's Witness. Stay away from it. I saw the testimony one time of a man and his wife who were in the Jehovah's Witness church. He was actually an elder in a kingdom hall for the Jehovah's Witnesses. And something had happened. I don't remember what it was, but he had started seeing he had internet in his house. He started seeing some things about theology, about Jehovah's Witnesses, about the things they believe and about what Christians traditionally believe. And he began to get interested and began to look more and more into theology, into Christian theology and Christian history to understand the differences between Christians through all of history and Jehovah's Witnesses. And he was doing this very carefully because he had been taught his whole life, don't even consider these things. If someone says Jehovah's Witnesses are not the one true way, don't even read what they have to say because they have nothing good for you. And they are taught to avoid them. And actually, when his wife found out that he had been reading all these sites on the internet, she became devastated because in her mind, he was just, leaving the faith completely, which did happen eventually, but had not yet at that time. They are taught not to think. You believe what the Watchtower tells you, that's it. Nothing else. So if you can get them to think, you are going miles, 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 miles. Okay. Any questions or comments so far? All right, let's talk about a few other of their practices and their beliefs. Some of these things are going to seem, I tried to pick out the ones that are really kind of odd or really central to their beliefs. And this will kind of help, you may have heard of some of these. This will help us get an understanding of what they're like, understand their culture a little better. Start off with the New World Translation. The New World Translations are the Jehovah's Witnesses' only version of the Bible they will study. And like I said before, this is a train wreck of a translation. It is specifically translated in just the way to defend their beliefs. For example, they don't believe that Jesus is God, right? The problem is, John 1:1 says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. They translate that, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. And so they argue that Jesus is not the God, he's just an angel, so sort of seen as a lesser kind of being, godlike being. And that's a bad translation. But they do that all throughout their scripture, and they are taught to defend it.
Did they actually write this translation?
Jehovah's Witnesses did translate it, and that's a good question because they just recently put out an updated version of the New World Translation. The older version, actually, you could not find out who translated the older version. I think it's because the people who translated it had no credentials. They were not intelligent. They were not, these great scholars that you should trust. But they said, well, we can't tell you who translated because we want them to be modest. We want to be humble. We don't want them to brag about it because this is the greatest translation ever, obviously, right? So you couldn't find out. With the new one, you might be able to find some translators, but there's still some major translation issues. Even in the new one, but they've gone back and fixed a lot of the things you could argue from their translation in the old one. So, yeah.
They were on sale last week at Walmart.
The new ones?
Yeah.
Were they really? Yeah. See, I have an electronic version because a friend of mine, a Jehovah's Witness friend of mine, told me about it. And so I got that and I started making a list of all the things they didn't catch, or tried to make a list of things they didn't catch when they updated it, so I could still use it to some degree if I ever needed to convince them. Okay. Jehovah's Witnesses and what they believe about hell. They are annihilationists. Jehovah's Witnesses are annihilationists, which means they don't believe that hell is an actual place. They think that it's just kind of a metaphor, and when a person basically dies and they're not, saved, although they wouldn't use any of this terminology that we use, they don't go to a place, they just cease to exist. They are annihilated. It's just gone, nothing. And remember, that was one of the things that Charles Taze Russell, the founder, struggled with from the very beginning, was believing in hell. Okay. Does anybody have their Bibles tonight? I may get you guys to look up a couple verses really quick. Someone look up Revelation 16:16. That'll tell us a little bit about the idea of Armageddon. Okay? Anybody else have a Bible? Can you look up Revelation 7:4? That would help someone else there. Anyway, they do a lot in Revelation because they are, again, they're kind of an apocalyptic group, and they take a lot of doctrine in Revelation and kind of take it farther than what we understand. Did you find that there, Mitchell?
Yeah.
What's Revelation 16:16?
Then they gathered the kings together to a place that Hebrew is called Armageddon.
Okay.
Or some translations have heard Armageddon.
Yeah, Armageddon is I don't want to assume I know something I don't, but yeah, Armageddon is another way of saying it, or Armageddon. They believe that Armageddon is the final event that's basically going to destroy the world and everyone in it, except Jehovah's Witnesses. See that picture on the side? The lady screaming, that lady's pulling her child out of like a wrecked car with fire, everything. Those are actual Jehovah's Witness pictures done by Jehovah's Witnesses, and I believe published in their Watchtower, I think. Or no, maybe it's like some sort of children's curriculum. Anyway, that's basically what they believe Armageddon looks like. Now, that's what it's going to be. And you're going to have people dying and suffering everywhere, except Jehovah's Witness families are going to be perfectly all right. Now, they do make one big error, is they are looking forward to this huge event called Armageddon. Except in Revelation, Armageddon's not an event, it's actually a place. But they don't pay much attention to that, though. Did someone look up Revelation 7:4?
Sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed.
Okay. So, Jehovah's Witnesses, based on that passage, believe that only 144,000 people go to heaven. There's more than 144,000 Jehovah's Witnesses, by the way. They believe that everybody else goes to the new earth, new heaven and new earth. They believe that there's two different groups. The really, really good ones, only 144,000 go to heaven. Everybody else is on the new earth. And so Christians, we believe that there are two possible ends, heaven and hell. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that there are three. New heaven, new earth, and ceasing to exist. So that's a big difference there. Okay. Talk about a few more. They have a concept called new light. And what's that? Yeah. Basically, the ones who can do the most and achieve the most can have a chance of getting the 144,000. And actually, if you ever go to, which I've never done this, but if you were ever to sit through a service at a Kingdom Hall where they meet, they will have communion set up very often, but they'll pass around the communion tray and nobody will take it. The reason is because the only people who are supposed to take communion are the people who believe they're a part of the 144,000. And you'll have a whole building full of people, and none of them will take communion. You might find one occasionally because they really believe they're one of the 144,000. They know, I think. No, I think a lot of times it's something they believe, and maybe they talk to some of their leaders about it, and the leaders will help them confirm. Maybe. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But it's, yeah, that's it. So, there's only 144,000 who actually get to take communion, though. Okay. One of the most troubling doctrines of the Jehovah's Witnesses is new light. Someone do me a favor and read Proverbs 4:18, but before you do, let me tell you what New Light is. Basically, this is their magic eraser. Anything they've ever said that they've changed, Jehovah's Witnesses have changed their doctrine immensely. Anything that they've said before that they want to change, they put it aside and they say something new and they say, oh, their reason is New Light. In other words, they say, we had this sort of like an old light, a partial truth, but now the whole real truth has been given to us, and God's just revealing a little bit of truth a little bit at a time. So now we know more, and now we have this new light, and we know that what we believed wasn't exactly right. Now we have the right beliefs. Okay. Does someone have Proverbs 4:18? This is where they get the idea of new light.
Like the shining sun that shines ever brighter into the perfect day.
Everybody hear that? Now, somebody explain to me how out of that passage you can get the idea that we are constantly, even today, being given new revelations all the time that put aside the old ones and help us accept the new. Anybody see that in there? Doesn't make any sense. But that's exactly what they're notorious for. They pick and choose, they cherry pick things out of Scripture. Yes, sir.
This chapter here in Proverbs has to do with wisdom. Wisdom is overall, wisdom is supreme.
Mm-hmm.
Really, they think they're building wise people around here.
I'm sure they do. Again,
This verse.
Yeah, and that would be, again, that us versus them mentality. We're the wise ones. We're the ones who have it figured out. You guys, not so much. Anyway, but they're notorious for kind of cherry picking stuff out of Scripture. Like that passage had nothing to do with this concept as they practice new light. But that's what they said. The problems with new light is, if I'm doing my best as a Jehovah's Witness right now to follow everything I'm taught by the Watchtower Society, how do I know that tomorrow it's not going to be different? How do I know they're not going to get new light and something I'm doing right now is wrong and it's going to be right tomorrow? It's like we don't really have the truth yet. It's kind of their stance. We may not have the truth. Anything is subject to change. Okay, they do have a practice called disfellowshipping, in which a Jehovah's Witness who breaks certain rules can actually be shunned by Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's other Jehovah's Witnesses. There's a mistake in your notes. It says non-Jehovah's Witnesses. It should be others. And this is sort of their version of what we would call like church discipline, except they're a little bit more extreme about it. If you're a Jehovah's Witness and you do, first off, you can get disfellowship for something that's not really wrong, but if you do get disfellowshipped, if you go to, say, McDonald's and you walk into the restaurant and you see someone from your Kingdom Hall and you know them and you go up and say, hey, how you doing? They're going to turn around and walk away. I mean, it's not just we're exercising discipline. I mean, it's like we are shunning you. We will have absolutely nothing to do with you right now. So yeah, they disfellowship people, and sometimes, the people do things that are wrong. If a young Jehovah's Witness couple has premarital sex, they will disfellowship them for that, very likely so, until they have come to their meetings enough and worked hard enough and proven that they are repentant. And although sometimes disfellowshipping is for bad things, I can tell you sometimes this is the best thing that can happen to a Jehovah's Witness. Because when they are disfellowshipped, they feel like they are rejected by the organization. And that's when they start to think a little bit more and maybe start to criticize the organization a little more. And that can sometimes be the push that helps get them out of the cult. And I do want to talk just a little bit about the organization of the Watchtower. They believe you can only understand the Bible when you go through their organization. Remember, that's one of the signs of a cult is a supreme human leader. Well, they have sort of like a council of men who sit at the top of this Watchtower Society. And they basically, the thought is you can read the Bible, you can study it for 1,000,000 years, but you won't understand it until you read it through the teaching of the Watchtower Society, rather than believing that people can read and understand things about it on their own. Okay, just a couple more pages of other practices and beliefs. You guys see this picture? This is from an actual publication of the Watchtower. That's, I believe that says 1994. See all those kids there? It's kind of a nice picture, isn't it? Nice smiling kids. You know what those kids all have in common? They're all dead. Every single one of them died because they were following Watchtower doctrine. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that no one is permitted to have a blood transfusion. Okay? The place they get this is in Acts 15. There's sort of a controversy about letting Gentiles into the early church. One of the things that the leaders asked the Gentiles not to do in order to sort of make the acceptance easier on the Jews is not to consume blood. Don't eat animals that basically still have the blood in them. And so they take that to mean that you are not allowed to sustain yourself in any way on the blood of something else. And they apply that to blood transfusions. And these are all kids that needed a blood transfusion, but they wouldn't have it because of their belief and because of the Watchtower doctrine, and they all died. It's kind of sad. It's one thing to die for your faith when it's true, but when it's simply the whims and the wrong interpretation of a group of people, it's really sad that happened. And actually at one time, they were forbidden from a smallpox vaccine, because they used to believe that smallpox vaccine actually had some blood in it or some residue from blood. Turns out it actually didn't. When they figured out it didn't, they changed their belief again. They get to do that. But yeah. So you're not allowed to have a blood transfusion. And Jehovah's Witnesses carry around in their wallet, in their pocket, a little card that says no blood transfusions on it. So if they're ever in a wreck and unconscious, they pull that out. They know they're not supposed to give them a blood transfusion. Okay. Like we said before, politics, Jehovah's Witnesses may not serve in the military, run for office, or even vote. They will not even vote. They have mock conversations once a week. They meet at their kingdom halls, and they sit down and they have conversations with each other, and they simulate going door to door and knocking on doors and talking to people and distributing tracts. And they will ask each other, remember I told you before, don't argue, don't bring up obvious differences because they're going to have an answer? This is why they have an answer. They practice answering the common questions that they get. They practice when someone says, well, but how do you say that Jesus is not God? Well, they have exactly an answer right then because they practiced it over and over and over again. So they're ready for criticism. They have these mock conversations. Okay? Just a few more beliefs I want to run over. And you may have heard of some of these. How many people had heard of the blood transfusions, by the way? You heard they couldn't have that? Yeah. That's one of the... What's that?
There's a case now in Texas over the same man.
And I bet it's the parents not wanting them to have a blood transfusion. And yep. And actually, there was an instance, I saw a family that came out of the Jehovah's Witnesses because their child needed a blood transfusion. And the hospital was going to basically take the child away, force the child to, give the child a blood transfusion anyway. And the leaders from their local kingdom hall, the elders from their kingdom hall, came and talked to them and started formulating a plan. All right, we can rent a helicopter and get a helicopter hit and get people in there and get them out of there. And the parents, that was one of the big things that shut them off to the cult was, don't you care about our kid? Do you know what we're going through? And you're already assuming we're going to do some escape plan. And anyway.
Well, when they believe in, when those things, they knew they were going to have a surgery, but they believe in giving their own blood for later use?
I don't know. That's a good question, actually. I'm not sure. I do believe they actually, if I'm right, I think they actually have a panel of experts, a panel of represents the Watchtower Society who talks with doctors and gets ideas of what kind of, to talk to them about procedures and what happens to get ideas of what kind of things are acceptable and not acceptable. So I think they do have people who do that and communicate with doctors about that. Yeah. Okay. Now, remember me saying that Jehovah's Witnesses don't like crosses? They're offended by them? That's because of their belief about the crucifixion. Go ahead and change it there. They believe that Jesus was not crucified on a cross. They believe that he was hung on a stake, upright, with his hands over his head like that, nailed together like that. They believe that that's how Jesus was killed. So they think that the cross is a pagan symbol, and they're very opposed to it. Flags. They will not salute a flag. They will not say a pledge of allegiance because they believe that doing so basically constitutes idolatry. Now, I grew up saying the Pledge of Allegiance in school, but I didn't do it in such a way that I thought that flag was somehow replacing God, But they will not have a flag. They will avoid it. They think it's pagan. They won't say a Pledge of Allegiance. In fact, actually, this picture right here, I put this picture in for a purpose. I thought it was kind of funny. Canada leading the world and being just north of the United States. I like that. I have a friend who's a Jehovah's Witness, who I just met online. And we had talked a little bit, and he lives in Canada. And we had gone back and forth. I just asked him, because I'd never been there, what's it like in Canada? He makes all these jokes. Oh, we all have pet penguins. And what's it like in America? I say, oh, we all shoot each other for looking funny at us. Things like that. We just go back and forth and make these jokes about our countries. I didn't know what Jehovah's Witnesses believed fully at the time. I went to his Facebook and I shared this picture because I thought it was funny. I thought he got a kick out of it because we had joked about the differences between the two countries. Never responded, stayed away from it, did not talk to me for a very long time. I didn't realize that because there's a flag on there, I was offending him. That's why I say you got to know the culture if you want to be careful not to offend them. Okay? And finally, holidays. Jehovah's Witnesses will not celebrate Christmas, Easter, birthdays. Of course, Halloween is way out for them. A lot of things they won't celebrate. They believe that they're all pagan. Okay? Really, dealing with a Jehovah's Witness it's really like walking on eggshells. And so if you don't understand them and if you're not trying to be careful, you're very likely to run them off. And it's so difficult to reach them. Okay. And what's that? I'm not 100% positive. I do believe that when you blow out, and this may not be the only reason, when you blow out birthday candles on a birthday cake, then you make a wish and you blow out the candle. There's some sort of practice that goes back to something you can relate it to some sort of like old pagan practice or something. And I think they draw the connection there and say, oh, it's pagan. And that's a problem. If you meet a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't have much of a childhood. They never celebrate Christmas. They never go on an Easter egg hunt. They never have a birthday. Yeah. So they don't get gifts on their birthday, nothing like that. And, I've heard people hypothesizing, and there's just a psychological hypothesis. They hypothesize, Michael Jackson, he was Jehovah's Witness, obsessed with everything childlike. He had a pet monkey named Bubbles. His ranch was Neverland. He just, everything about childlike with him. I've heard people hypothesize, he didn't have a childhood. It's a psychological thing. He's just trying to have a child, and, I know there's more issues there, that comes up. What's that? To the best of my knowledge, I don't know. I don't know how devout he was or how practicing he was, but I know he at least carried some of those convictions, I think, through his life. So
they do not celebrate birthdays because they believe that those celebrations displease God.
Yes, they believe that they are pagan. I'm not 100% positive about that. My guess is they don't. Now, I know they will do things on... Oh, are you on their site? They've got very interesting question and answers on their site. They have updated the question and answers. I went there and looked the other day. They've updated the question and answers since I've been there before. Used to be there was a spot for question and answers. You click on it. The first frequently asked question was, is Jehovah's Witnesses a cult? And when you put on your website, the most frequently asked question is, are you guys a cult? That kind of labels you from the start, I think, a little bit. They've changed it now, and the website looks much nicer, and it's much more professionally done, so they're not going to have the same problems. But they're constantly updating and trying to look more relevant and trying to cover up, make their beliefs not look so strange. Okay.
So how do they take in new people?
Going door to door. Very often, they will, what their ideal is to come into your house to do a Bible study.
Well, I'm not supposed to be thinking.
What, Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yeah.
No.
I'm not supposed to think.
Yeah, and remember we talked about
I'm thinking, well, I might want to join this group.
Well, remember we talked about some of the common traits of Jehovah's Witnesses, or of cults. Mind control was one. Gradual indoctrination was one. It's kind of like, have you ever heard the analogy how you boil a frog? If you get a pot of boiling water and drop a frog in it, it's going to jump out. But if you put a frog in a pot of cold water and slowly heat it up, that frog will boil to death before it knows to get out. And that's kind of how a lot of new converts come in. They are introduced to the doctrine, and it's a very controlled environment. It's in a Bible study with their translation of the Bible, their workbooks, their everything. They slowly teach you a little bit at a time and get you thinking and get you questioning. Well, maybe the Bible does say this. Well, I can't argue with that. Well, the Bible does. And over time, they...
Something like walking over going into Kingdom Hall on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Saturday.
That sounds like it.
The thing of it is, I've talked a lot.
Yeah.
Because I like to argue.
They don't like you then, but go ahead. Yeah.
But they come around where I was at, working and everything. they are very nice people.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take the thing that they're not. They're very.
Oh, absolutely.
Carry on good conversation. They are very dedicated to what they do. And, they're nice people. But now their whole goal is to get you.
Yep.
You just can't say, well, I attend Fairlawn, Church of Christ.
Yeah, because they'll push you.
Because then next thing you know, well, we have this.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I was reading at it, in a lot of the management classes you do a lot of role play.
Mm-hmm.
Never, ever role play with the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Well,
They're good.
they are good because they role play every week at their mock conversations. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, a lot of these groups, especially Mormons, we're talking about Mormons next week, they are really nice people. I love Mormons. They're friendly people. The thing about Jehovah's Witnesses, they're taught to be very professional. That's why you'll never see a man with facial hair. They think it's unprofessional. They always dress nice. They're very formal. They're very polite in how they speak to you. They're taught to be very professional in that regard, yeah.
And they used to come over before me and John lived a mile and a half off the road up in the valley.
Really?
Yeah.
They will get just about anywhere, won't they?
Yeah, little things keep hanging in the door all the time up there.
Yep.
They come, Daddy liked them. They come over and sit and talk to Daddy.
Really? Wow. That's nice. That says something. If they'll sit down and just have a friendly conversation with you, that says something about the kind of progress you've made with them. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Anything at all? Yeah, these resources are in your book if you want to get a little more. I also got a couple of really good books in the library if you want to check them out. Can't check them out until I'm done with the cults class because I'm still using them though. A lot of really good information though. And you can find out more of what they believe and best ways to reach them.
I bet you David Eisenhower was kicked out of the church.
He may have been kicked out. I don't know if he was kicked out or he just left. A lot of times, sometimes, Alan, I imagine it's very much like, I broke up with you. No, I broke up with you. No, I broke up with you. They leave and they haven't shown up for a long time. So fine, you're disfellowshipped. Well, I'm not coming back. Well, fine. Well, you can't come back because you're that's kind of the, I'm not fired, I quit kind of thing. That's how it goes a lot of times, I think. Yeah.
Well, it looks like to me, once you got this fellowship, it would be hard to get back in, because if they're going to shun you and not have anything to do with you, then how are they going to bring you back in?
My guess is that if you start showing the initiative and you start coming to the meetings and the mock conversations and wanting to do the door-to-door preaching and everything, if you do that, they'll start being more and more open to you, is my guess. And eventually they'll decide to lift the disfellowshipping, status if you show enough initiative.